Have you ever felt a strange tightness on your left wrist? As if something unseen had gently wrapped itself around you. Not painful, but present. A weightless pressure that you couldn't explain, a tingling when no one touched you, a moment when your own body seemed to whisper, "Protect this place." It might have happened when you were standing in a crowd, or when someone looked at you a little too long, with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. You brushed it off. But something inside you remembered. Somewhere, buried beneath the noise of the modern world, your soul still speaks the language of energy. And the left wrist is its secret entry point. In the forgotten pages of ancient wisdom, elders didn't just wear ornaments. They wore shields, strings, stones, symbols, all on the left wrist, not for beauty, but for survival. Because they believed the left side of the body was sacred, vulnerable, the part that receives what the world cannot see. Jealousy, praise laced with envy, eyes that admire with bitterness underneath. They knew that not every gaze is clean, not every hand that reaches toward you is empty. And so they guarded the gate. But we forgot. We stopped listening to the signals our own bodies send. We said, "It's just a nerve. It's probably nothing." But what if it was something? What if that gentle ache was a message from your ancestors, a call to awaken what they knew and you buried? The mark on your left wrist is not a wound. It is a whisper, an invitation to look deeper. And if this already feels like something your soul remembers, then maybe you're not just watching this video. Maybe you're remembering it. Subscribe to the Spine Gospel, not for information, but for remembrance. Long before mirrors were invented, humans still knew when they were being watched. A woman in ancient Babylon once felt it. As she passed through the marketplace, she sensed something pressing against her spirit. Not a hand, not a word, just a stare. She went home and fell ill the same night. No wounds, no fever, just the weight of something unspoken. They called it igigu, a gaze that holds power, the evil eye. But it was never just a superstition. Across time and across continents, from Egypt to Greece to Arabia, people understood that a gaze can carry more than sight. It can carry intention. It can carry envy. It can carry the silent wish that your light be dimmed. The evil eye is not always cast by enemies. Sometimes it comes from those who say, "I'm happy for you," but mean, "Why not me?" It's the stare that lingers a second too long on your success, your smile, your peace. It enters when praise is poisoned by comparison. And the body feels it, not in the mind, but in the skin, the joints, the breath that suddenly shortens. You don't need to hear a curse to be cursed. You just need to be seen with the wrong eyes. But what makes the evil eye so dangerous is not that it's thrown. It's that it is received. And this is where ancient wisdom sharpened its gaze, not on the eye of the one who casts, but on the body of the one who absorbs. Because your body has gates, invisible openings through which unseen energy enters. And of all those gates, the left wrist is among the most exposed. It is not an accident that pain or heaviness begins there. It is a signal. A red thread around the wrist was not decoration. It was a warning. Because when the world looks at you, not all eyes are kind, and not all stares are silent. Some pierce, and some linger longer than they should. Why is it always the left? When blessings are given in sacred rituals, they are placed in the right hand. But when energy enters, when vibrations, intentions, and invisible forces approach, they slip into the left. The ancients knew this. In Chinese medicine, the left side is yin, the feminine, the passive, the open. In Reiki, healers place their receiving hand on the left to pull in the energy before it flows out through the right. In Sufi circles, the left hand is the hand that listens. It doesn't give, it receives. But the wrist. The wrist is more than a limb, it is a threshold, a sacred border between the world and the bloodstream of your soul. And the left wrist? It is the softest gate. No armor, no muscle, just a thin barrier between what's outside and what comes in. This is why you sometimes feel it there first, before the headache, before the anxiety, before your thoughts collapse in spirals. It begins with a flicker of discomfort, a subtle throb, a heat that no thermometer records. You may have brushed it off as poor circulation or the way you slept, but your body wasn't malfunctioning. It was whispering. Because when energy, good or bad, moves toward you, it tests your gates, and the left wrist is like an unlocked door. Have you ever stood near someone and suddenly felt your mood drop? Have you ever hugged someone and found your left side aching after they left? That wasn't in your head. That was in your energy. Our ancestors didn't have MRIs, but they had intuition. They understood that certain points on the body were not just flesh. They were spiritual receivers. And the left wrist was the most honest of them all. It could not hide what it felt. It could only carry it into your bloodstream, your breath, your being. This is why they protected it, not out of fear, but out of sacred respect. Because when the world knocks, it knocks on the left. In the quiet hours of dawn, an old woman in Morocco ties a red thread around her granddaughter's wrist. No one speaks. The air feels ancient. The knot is pulled tight, 3 times, not for style, not for tradition, but for protection. Because long before bracelets were fashion, they were locks. Across the deserts of Arabia, the hills of Greece and the streets of Old Jerusalem, people wore sacred items on their left wrist, not to be admired, but to be shielded. The Nazar bead, cobalt blue with a white center, said to reflect the evil eye back to its sender. The Hamza hand, open and steady, said to block harm and invite divine protection. The red thread in Kabbalah, wound around 7 times, always on the left wrist, blessed in silence to absorb negative energy. Copper cuffs in African tribes, obsidian stones in Mesoamerica, Islamic tawis containing sacred verses, all tied, clasped, or wrapped on the wrist that receives. They weren't fashion. They were filters, spiritual circuit breakers, because the left wrist doesn't choose what enters. It simply allows. And when too much darkness entered, it didn't just affect the body. It touched the soul. So they created barriers, small, sacred, silent. Imagine wearing a mirror around your wrist, not to see yourself, but to reflect back what doesn't belong to you. That's what these amulets did. They didn't stop energy. They redirected it. They reminded the world, you may look, you may speak, but you may not enter. And they reminded the wearer, your body is not defenseless. It remembers how to protect itself, if you remember how to listen. What we now call superstition was once spiritual intelligence. They didn't need warnings on screens. They wore their warnings as bracelets, knotted in silence, blessed by breath, guarding the wrist that never lies. Because long before the pain is spoken, the left wrist already knows. Have you ever felt something in your body? A flicker, a heaviness, a warmth, and you knew it wasn't physical, but you also knew it wasn't nothing. A strange pressure on your left wrist, as if something had landed there. Not sharp, not painful, just pre-sent. And then moments later your energy changed. You couldn't focus. You felt drained, scattered, low, without a reason. This is your body's ancient language. It doesn't speak in words, it speaks in sensations. The left wrist, with its thin skin and pulsing veins, is more than anatomy. It's a sensor, a place where the unseen world brushes against the edge of your skin. It begins subtly. A tingling when someone stares too long, a twitch when you hear a voice you don't trust, a sudden wave of warmth as if something passed through you but nothing touched you. In spiritual systems, this point is sacred. It houses meridians in traditional Chinese medicine, pressure points in Ayurveda, and nerve clusters modern science still doesn't fully understand. But long before charts and diagrams, your ancestors simply felt it. And when that feeling came, they didn't ignore it. They listened. Today we call it coincidence, or maybe stress, but stress doesn't always come from within. Sometimes it arrives through people, places, glances. Have you ever hugged someone and after they left, your body felt heavier than when they came? Have you ever held someone's hand only to later feel anxious without knowing why? These aren't emotions, they're echoes, energetic fingerprints left behind, and the left wrist remembers them all. It is your body's silent alarm, flashing quietly beneath the surface, telling you when something has entered that doesn't belong. Not all pain is physical, not all discomfort needs medicine, some of it needs release. Because the left wrist doesn't lie, it simply reveals what your mind has not yet noticed. Before there were doctors, there were keepers of the unseen, healers who understood that the body is not only blood and bone, but current and channel. And when the left wrist began to ache or buzz or throb, they didn't reach for medicine. They reached for memory. Because some wounds are energetic, and some healing begins with ritual. In the Highland Days of old Persia, women would dip their fingers into salt water at dawn. They would press that water to the left wrist, letting it dry under the rising sun. Salt was not just salt. It was a cleanser of energy, a barrier against the invisible. They believed salt held memory, of earth, of ocean, of purity untouched by envy. In the deserts of North Africa, sacred oils were mixed with whispers. Black seed oil, frankincense, myrrh. These were not perfumes. They were prayers in liquid form. The oil would be warmed between the hands, and as it touched the left wrist, verses were spoken. Not loudly, softly. Sometimes just one name, Ya Hafiz, the protector. In India, threads were tied. In West Africa, copper was worn. In indigenous lands, obsidian stones were strapped over the pulse. Each material carried a frequency. Each act was intentional. Each movement said, "This space is guarded." These rituals weren't spells. They were reminders to the body and the energy field around it. A reminder that the wrist is a gate, and a gate deserves a guard. They were done regularly, not in fear, but in reverence. Just as one sweeps a home, they swept the wrist of what it had absorbed. Resentment, silent curses, fragments of other people's chaos. And you can still do this, not as imitation, but as remembrance. Wash your wrist with salt. Touch it with oil and intention. Tie something sacred around it, not for show, but to signal to the unseen. This spirit is aware. This gate is not open to all. Because when the left wrist is honored, it no longer just receives, it chooses. Before the doctors had names for every sensation, before charts measured bones and pulses, the elders knew what pain really meant, especially the kind that lingers, silent, constant, unexplained, like the discomfort on your left wrist that comes and goes without reason. They believed, ouch, pain wasn't just physical, it was a whisper, a forgotten language of the soul, a last warning from your energetic self that your spirit is unguarded, exposed, or even targeted. In many sacred traditions, the left wrist was the vein of memory, where old pain resurfaces when your spiritual boundaries are breached. Maybe you allowed something, or someone, to touch your energy without permission. Maybe you've worn something that carries the vibration of harm. Maybe the world has numbed you to the point where even your soul's alarm system feels muted. And yet, it still hurts. This pain isn't always meant to be healed. Sometimes it's meant to be heard. It's your body telling you, you are not as protected as you think. And it's your spirit reminding you once knew how to shield yourself. You've simply forgotten. Modern life encourages forgetting. It calls ancient wisdom superstition. It mocks energy, dismisses intuition, and silences ancestral knowing. But in your blood, in your bones, in the pulse beneath your left wrist, the memory lives on. You are not weak. You are sensitive. You are not broken. You are remembering. And the pain on your left wrist? It's not a curse. It's a sacred message. Return to yourself. Reclaim your energy. Guard your soul like it was once guarded by the stars. Because those who forget the language of energy become prisoners of pain they'll never understand. Let this be the last time you ignore what your body already knows. Let this be the first time you finally listen.